the faith and those who live it. I'm your host, Renee Kranz. In the studio with me today, I have Father Tim Smith. Welcome, Father Smith.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, it's so good to have you back. You were gone from the diocese for a little while to get your Canon Law degree, which we are going to talk about. And then you're back just recently. Like, how long have you been back?
75 days.
He's counting. He's so excited to be back. He's counting the days.
Yeah, I just remind people that because there are a lot of things I've had to learn, and it's only been 75 days, so I remind people that.
So give me a break, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
A little grace would be great. All right, so we wanted Father Smith to come in to tell us a little bit about his getting his Canon Law degree, his time in Rome. We'll talk about that a little bit. We're really going to focus on the church's teaching around social communications because that was Father's emphasis, his focus while he was getting his degree. So this is going to be fun because this is, of course, my area of emphasis as well, social communications. So this is going to be super, super fun for me. Father, will you start by just telling us a little bit, remind us who you are, where you've been, and then a little bit about Canon Law School and your experience with that in Rome.
Thanks. So my name is Father Timothy Smith, priest from the Diocese of Sioux Falls for 7 years. I've been at the cathedral for 2 years, and then afterwards I went to the northern part of the diocese, and I was a pastor of 3 parishes in Edmonds and McPherson County. So now it's part of the pastorate in the northern part of the Diocese of Sioux Falls, and I really loved being a pastor and a priest. And then 2 years ago, Bishop DeGrood asked me to serve the church in the ministry of canon law, and so that requires that the priest has proper training, and there's a program for that. There are 2 different degree tracks. There's a licentiate in canon law, which gives a clergy member or any member of the church the proper credentials to serve in canon law ministry in a number of different capacities. There's also a doctorate in canon law, which really shows your mastery of a specific area of canon law. And there are many, many priests and bishops who have those credentials. And of course, even lay people can study canon law. So in my own track for studying canon law, I worked alongside priests from around the world, religious sisters, as well as laymen and women who are also in service to the church. And they serve the church in all sorts of different areas, whether they're from religious institutes, religious orders, or dioceses, or even just doing it to help other members of the church. So there are lots of opportunities to do that. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity. As I have mentioned to one of the staff members here at the Chancery, since I've studied canon law, it's like I see the church now in high definition.
That's a great way to say that.
And so it's a formation process. We talk about priestly formation, and all of us are engaged in becoming lifelong missionary disciples of God's love. And so that means we're always learning more about the faith. And so these 2 years were a real privileged time for me to learn more about the church's theology, but also the discipline of canon law and how it's practically used to help the church flourish and to do well. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity.
Yeah. Did you enjoy your time in Rome and in your studies, or was it like, oh gosh, I have to go back to school?
So I'm really grateful for it, and I'm grateful for the Canon Law School that I studied in. So to kind of clarify for the listeners and even for people here, part of my study, there was a time in Rome where I actually went with my canon law faculty, and we visited all the Roman dicasteries, which are all the offices of the Holy Father, the Pope, which legislate and pass policy to govern and guide the Catholic Church around the world, as well as the high Roman courts, the Roman Rota, the Apostolic Signatura, as well as special offices for safeguarding and protecting minors and vulnerable adults. There are special offices for that as well. So I'm grateful for that opportunity. But my canon law school is actually based out of Canada. And
oh, that's right.
In North America, there are 2 canon law schools. There's one in Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C., and then in Canada, in Ottawa, which is the capital city of Canada, at St. Paul University, there's a faculty of canon law. And both faculties enjoy a good reputation, and they're the leading edge of the English language canon law faculties in the world. And so people from all sorts of countries, from England, Australia, African countries where English is the dominant language, because at one time they were English colonies. people from Southeast Asia that have an English-speaking ability. So people from all those nations come there to where I studied in Canada. And then part of our study included a time in Rome. So it was last summer that I was with my faculty members and 20 other students, who included, one of the mystic monks from, if you ever get that mystic monk coffee,
yeah.
Father Simon is one of the mystic monks. He was there with me
Nice.
in Rome, as well as many priests and religious sisters, and also lay people from around the United States and North America, as well as those other countries, Australia
Right.
and England. So it was a real privileged time to be with the church, and of course to go to Mass with the Holy
Yeah.
Father, and to meet some of the Roman officials and many of the cardinals of the church.
Yeah.
It's a privileged time. I could talk about it for hours.
Okay, so you have said two words several times. We've talked about it. Canon law. There's probably a few people out there who are like, well, what exactly is canon law? So what is canon law, Father Tim?
Well, the simple definition is canon law is the authentic compilation of the laws of the Catholic Church that have developed over time. And so starting from the very beginning, when Jesus sent out the apostles and he ascended into heaven, for the very beginning in Scripture, but also in the tradition of the church, from early church documents and manuscripts, we see that the church and the bishops, the apostles, the successors to the apostles, have issued teachings and rules to guide the church in its functioning and in its administration.
Right.
And it's really rooted in the codification of canon law. And there have been, throughout the church's history, a few different bringing together of that tradition of all the different policies and teachings of the bishops in guiding the church. And of course, the first one comes from about 1,000 years ago. It was Gratian's decree, and it was a monk who brought together all these teachings in a simplified way that guide the church and summarized it over those first 1,000 years of the church.
Yeah.
And then we see about 100 years ago was the Pio Benedictine Code, and it comes out of this time of Vatican I, whereas this desire to bring together all these teachings and these rules of the church in its functioning. And so the canon law of the church is a lot like wiring and plumbing in a building. It's by way of analogy. If we think of the church as a structure, if we think about wiring and plumbing, it's used to make the building usable and have different features. And if you walked into a building and you turned the light switches, or you turned the faucets and no water came out, or there was no electricity, you would say there's something wrong with this building, right? Like whoever designed this, it doesn't have any functionality. And the code of canon law and the canon laws of the church, each one of them have meaning, and they help the church in its functioning. And so the code of canon law, there are many like it, but this one is mine right here. This is an annotated version of the code of canon law in the English language, but you can access the code of canon law online through the Vatican website. But it's broken up into 7 main books that cover specific topic areas of the church's teaching and of how the church functions. And just as my analogy with the plumbing and the electricity, each one of these canons help the church function, and it guides, not only talks about the Pope and priests and bishops and deacons and lay people, but it also guides us in how we live out our lives as missionary disciples. And the very last canon of the church, it says the supreme law of the church is the salvation of souls. And it's kind of stuck in there right at the end. Of course, this is all about Jesus and about how he saves us. So it's related, it's rooted in the church's theology, but it's also rooted in the church's tradition. And so canon law is important for how the church functions and lives.
Right. Okay, good. Thank you for that definition. So when you go through canon law, you have to pick a focus.
That's right.
And you chose to specialize in social communication. Why did you do that? And what is meant by that?
So the church, in the Code of Canon Law, there are different areas of emphasis. One of those areas is called the teaching office of the church. Really, it's about the area of how, of course, bishops and the church's ministration of teaching about Jesus, teaching about the scriptures, teaching about sacred tradition. And it covers all sorts of areas about Bibles and their translations and Catholic institutions and Catholic schools and universities. And there's a subsection that touches on the instruments of social communication. and it gives encouragement so that way members of the church who use means of mass media, so that would be radio, television, film and theater, the online environment, the internet, social media, and even contemporary times, artificial intelligence, which even this last year, the church has even given new teachings to guide us in how we use these means of mass media. And one of the things I encountered, why did I want to specialize in this area of teaching? And especially, you have to pick something that you're interested in.
Yes.
So, Renee, I had to spend an entire year researching and writing about one specific topic.
You better really like it.
And it has to be, it's a thesis paper, so it gets in the minutia, very, very detailed, very narrow. Otherwise, it's too broad and you really can't, hammer down a main point.
Right.
So my thesis is the role of the diocesan bishop as the moderator of the conduct of priest in the online environment.
Ah, nice.
So here we are on Catholic Views, and it's streamed online. You can see it on YouTube. So I'm in the online environment right now.
Yep.
So how is it that the bishop can have some oversight for what I say and do right now with you on Catholic Views? And why did I pick this specific topic? Because when I was a pastor at Holy Cross Parish in Ipswich, South Dakota, I encountered something interesting. I would talk to some of my members after daily mass, and once in a while they would say to me, "Father, I was online and I saw a video by a priest and he said this." And they said, "I'm confused. Does that make sense? Or what do you think about that, Father?"
Right.
And I would say, "Well, I don't know who that priest is. Where is he from?" And they might even be very good Catholics. So they would say, "Well, he has one of those shirts on like you, one of those black shirts with the white tab on there." And I said, "Well, you can buy those on Amazon.com." So I don't know if this is a real priest saying that. And he might be a very holy and good priest, but he might say some things or behave in a way that is kind of funny. So there might be a priest on the online environment doing all sorts of goofy things. And you might think, well, I don't think a priest should do stuff like that.
Right.
That's kind of goofy, you know. They also may say some things that might be very negative and might be disturbing to other people. And you might say, well, who is that priest connected to? Does he work for a diocese?
Yes.
Does he work for a religious order? And then also, doesn't the church say how we should behave on radio, television, film? And as a matter of fact, there's Canon Law on that. And to summarize it, it's Canon 822 and 823. Basically, Canon 822 says, all the church, the Christian faithful, you, Renee Kranz, me, Father Timothy Smith, even the bishops, they can use these instruments of the social communication, radio, television, film, online, social media, to proclaim the gospel. In fact, we're supposed to be missionaries, so it is right for us to use these means for good, to proclaim the gospel.
Right.
Canon 823 says it's the responsibility of bishops to safeguard faith and morals, even if people are using the instruments of social communication. So another abbreviated way of saying is, do good with these instruments of social communication, especially online and the internet.
Right.
823, don't do evil. Don't hurt faith and don't hurt morals. And of course, we know that's possible as well, right?
Oh, yeah.
People in online, you don't have to go very far in social media. Look in one of those comment boxes and boy, there can be a bunch of really good Catholics, but it'd be hard to decide which one is the good one because the way they talk to each other on that online environment, that might go against the virtue of Christian charity.
Right.
And I've seen this play out in social media and in the online environment, as all of the members of the church have in recent years, because as we've seen the rise and prominence of not only social media like Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, but also streaming platforms, we can see how they create controversy. And we use them for good here in the Diocese of Sioux Falls.
Most of the time, we really try.
Catholic Views, radio, television, we broadcast the Sunday TV Mass. All of these things are talked about in the church's doctrine on how we can use mass media. So it really goes back to, and even these canons goes back 60 years to the Second Vatican Council. And that's where the very first document that the Council Fathers promulgated, and the Holy Father, John the 23rd at the time, Blessed John the 23rd, Saint John the 23rd, who we just celebrated his feast day last week, was the decree on the instruments of social communication. It's called Inter Mirifica in Latin. But basically, it's the decree on the mass media. And at that time, the fathers of the church, they recognized, think about it, it's the 1960s. We have television. We just came from the age of radio. We know that there is even going to be satellites. There's new technology. There's the race to go to the moon and all these things. And all this new technology. And the thought is, the church should teach about how people use this mass media, because it can be used for good, but also, mind you, we just come out of the time of World War II. We saw the propaganda that was used in World War II by those who were enemies of the faith, those who perpetrated mass human atrocities. And we could see that propaganda misuse of mass media causes harm, evil. And so the document says it's the responsibility of all the church to use mass media for good. And it also encourages, from the very beginning, families and parents, teachers, educators, experts in mass media, journalists like yourself who have a journalism background and you serve the church. This is all about people like you who can collaborate, as well as the bishops, priests, clergy, religious sisters and brothers. We can all collaborate so we can use mass media well. And so the law of the church, but also the theology of the church, supports communications. And so it touches right on the ministry that we're doing in this very instant, which is teaching about Jesus, talking about how God touches our lives, sharing our Catholic views with the world, and using the modern means of social communication to do it. So that's what I dove into in my teaching, and specifically how the bishop can do it with the priest that he has, because that's where there is a lot of teaching on how we can conduct ourselves with our different responsibilities and our jobs that we have.
Yeah. Can you, so we have about 3-4 minutes-ish left. Can you tell us, like, how does the bishop guide? Like, what's the church teaching? How does the bishop do that? What point of view do they usually come from for that?
Well, certainly every diocese has laws and policies that every priest is meant to follow. And even in the Diocese of Sioux Falls, we have ministerial standards which we're supposed to abide by. And so all sorts of negative behaviors, hate speech, negative activities, we're already obliged to refrain from those things, as well as the universal law of the church has certain responsibilities for clerics. And so living out those responsibilities can safeguard us from using these instruments in a negative way. But also for all the members of the church, not only just priests, we all have this responsibility. I'll share with you a real flesh and blood example. So I was teaching and preaching on this in a parish. At this time I was in Ottawa, so for the last 2 years I've floated around and I've done mass at all sorts of different parishes. And when I was in the middle of writing my paper, I would give a homily, and I would teach about this in my homily if it fit in with the Sunday readings. And I remember after Mass one day, I had a woman approach me. I was in a city of 1 million people, and she said, "Father, I want you to give my son a blessing. He is a YouTuber." And I said, "Oh, wow." And in my research, I studied a lot about social media and YouTube. There's laws. There's even studies about the most popular YouTube priests around the world. And some of them have millions of followers. And there's a great potential for good there, but there's also a great potential for harm. So I met this young man, and his mom brought him over to me, and I said, "How many subscribers do you have?" And he said, "I got about 500,000. And I turned to Mom. I said, "Mom, congratulations. You have a nice businessman in your home." You know, with that many subscribers, you can earn, based off of advertising, well over $100,000 a year. And as a teenager, that's a good business to start out. I never made that when I was working at the gas station when I was a teenager. Now, the other caveat to that is, what are you doing? What's your content? And so I asked him the question, "So is the content you put on your channel, is it appropriate?" And he kind of hung his head in shame a little bit. He said, "Well, I do comedy and I do satire," is what he said. Now, he's a young teenager, and I'm sure there are other young teenagers who are subscribing and watching his show. But I reminded him, I said, you know, we're all responsible for what we say and do, and we're trying to be the best people we can be. And I gave him the blessing like his mom wanted me to do. But I think mom knew that it's important for us to use these in a good and proper way.
Yeah.
Now, like that young man, there are so many thousands of other people who are using these new means of social communication, including priests, including religious
Yes.
sisters, including
Yes.
brothers. We all have the responsibility to use them for good and avoid evil.
Yes.
And so the fundamental principle, how can we use our social media, our platforms, our online presence for good and avoid evil? And that's something that's overarching for all of us. The church guides bishops and priests with policies and laws so that way we can do it well. But this applies to all of us. We all have to
Yes.
follow the 10 Commandments, the Beatitudes,
Yep.
the law of love from Jesus. And if we live out that law of love, we can be real missionary disciples,
Yeah.
and we can avoid all the negativity of sin.
Yeah. Those are some really great tips. I'm really glad you said those things because it's tough out there when you're online and you have all this negative stuff coming at you. So thank you for those tips and for helping people remind them, hey, be good people online too, not just offline, online.
And this is my last plug.
Yeah.
I want people to know that it's important to support our Catholic apostolates in social communication. So when you do the CFSA in the Diocese
Yes.
of Sioux Falls,
Yes.
you support the bishop's bulletin.
Yeah.
You support our Catholic Views, this show you're watching right now.
Yep.
You support all these things. Support Catholic radio. I'm a big
Yes,
fan. Real Presence
totally.
Radio. I'm on there often. I'm a big fan of Catholic
listen to
radio.
it all the time, yes.
Support your Catholic radio stations. Support EWTN and global and national Catholic initiatives. You might be surprised. You might think, well, they're big and they're powerful. They are more small than you might imagine.
Yes.
I mean, even in the Vatican Dicastery for Communication, there is one of its officials, Mr. Chris Wells. He's from Aberdeen, South Dakota. He used to be a seminarian for the Diocese of Sioux Falls, and he's the voice you're going to hear when the Pope celebrates Mass, and it's translated in English. It's a guy from Aberdeen who's saying the Pope's words.
Yeah.
Think about how this is. We can do so many good things with communications when we share the gospel, and we do it rooted in God's love. And so
Yeah.
support all these outreaches. They're so important,
Yep.
and they always need your help. And Renee, you
Yes.
know, we're sometimes by a shoestring, we're saying, we got to get this
Yes.
produced. We have to have a response. And so pray for us too, who do
Yes.
Catholic communications.
Yeah, please. Thank you so much for all of that, Father Smith. This was really interesting. I hope everybody got some good things out of it. And if Father Smith is traveling around the diocese, you might hear some similar homilies because he's going to talk about this stuff because it is deep. It's like close to his heart, and we need that conversation about this. So thank you for doing that.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thanks. All right. We are getting close to November 5th, the vote in South Dakota. So if you are planning on going out and voting, please vote no on Amendment G, which is the abortion amendment. If you are unsure about whether or not you're going to vote because you're not sure about the other races, go and vote specifically for against Amendment G at least. The rest of it, do whatever you want, but vote no on Amendment G. That's it for us today. Hope you'll join us again next week for more Catholic Views.